The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in one decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence.
Somewhere along the line, during one of the coldest and most calculated periods in modern history, something unusual happened inside one of the most skeptical agencies in the world. The CIA started paying attention to something most people would file under spiritual. Not because they had suddenly become mystical, but because certain experiences kept showing up with a consistency that made them impossible to ignore. Out-of-body perception, remote viewing, time behaving like it wasn't a straight line anymore. And sitting at the center of all of it was something called the gateway process. Now picture this for a second. A process that doesn't involve drugs, machines, or decades in a monastery. Just sound, breath, focus, and a very specific kind of internal training. A process so elegant in its simplicity that it almost feels suspicious, and so unsettling in its implications that an intelligence agency found it necessary to study it in secret for years before classifying the results and keeping them from the public for decades. What they found wasn't confirmation of superpowers. It wasn't proof of time travel. What they found was something more disturbing than anything science fiction could invent. Evidence that human consciousness can operate beyond the limits we've always assumed were absolute, and that the reality you experience every single day may be far less solid and far more responsive to your consciousness than anyone ever taught you to consider. This video isn't going to ask you to believe anything. It's going to invite you to follow a thread, because what sits at the center of the gateway process isn't magic, and it isn't militarism. It's a question humans have been asking since they began asking anything at all. What are you, really? And what is reality, really? And what happens when a trained mind begins asking those questions from inside a state of consciousness most people have never experienced? Stay, because what comes next won't just change how you think about consciousness. It will change how you think about yourself. The Monroe Institute called its core technology HemiSync, hemisphere synchronization. And the idea behind it is so simple it almost feels obvious. Your brain has two hemispheres, each with its own style of thinking, and most people spend their entire lives with those two hemispheres slightly out of sync. Like two musicians playing the same song, but never quite landing on the beat together. There's tension in that desynchronization. There's wasted energy. There's a quality of attention that never fully forms, because the two sides never arrive at the same note at the same time. HemiSync corrects this using binaural beats, two tones, one in each ear, slightly different. The brain doesn't hear two separate tones the way you'd expect. It perceives the difference between them as a third beat. And then something happens that is not mystical and is not a metaphor. It's biology doing what biology does when it's gently guided. The brain starts to follow that beat. Frequency following, response. The two hemispheres draw closer, and when they draw closer, something in the quality of attention shifts in a way that's difficult to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. A psychiatrist named Dr. Stuart Twemlow described how HemiSync can concentrate the brain's energy output, and one of the Monroe Institute trainers used a metaphor that doesn't leave you once you hear it. An ordinary mind is like a lamp. Light in every direction, scattered, diffuse, useful for seeing what's nearby. Under synchronization, the mind becomes a laser, coherent, precise, directional. A lamp helps you see what's around you. A laser cuts through distances a lamp could never reach. And here is where the process stops being about calm or clarity and starts being about something much larger. If reality is something you experience through consciousness, then changing the state of consciousness changes what reality even means to you. And once you start thinking like that, you begin to understand why an intelligence agency would care. Not out of poetic curiosity, because a focused mind that can reach beyond normal limits isn't just personal growth. It's a kind of power that no conventional technology can replicate. But before we get there, there's something more fundamental that Gateway teaches about what you are. Something most people have never considered about their own body. And it changes everything about how you understand the idea of being present somewhere. Resonance is one of those words that sounds poetic, but is actually brutally practical. Put two guitars in the same room. Strum one string on the first. If the second guitar has a matching string, it starts vibrating on its own. Quiet, but unmistakable. No hands touching it, no magic, just vibration and sympathy between frequencies. Human beings work exactly the same way. Most people just never notice, because the room is invisible. Gateway training works with something called resonant tuning. And yes, this is where humming shows up. It sounds almost ridiculous until you try it. A low hum in the chest, a vibration in the skull, something loosens, something settles. The point isn't the hum itself. The point is what the hum does. It takes your scattered energy and gathers it. Like calling your own attention back home after years of it wandering in every direction except inward. The process then introduces what it calls the energy conversion box. Simple on the surface, you imagine a box and you place your worries inside it, the unfinished tasks, the resentment, the anxious loops, the mental noise that normally rides alongside you all day like a passenger nobody invited. Anyone can visualize a box. The difference is intention. Because when you do it seriously, you're training your psyche to stop clinging to chaos like it's a comfort blanket. And then Gateway proposes something called the energy balloon, a protective sphere you build internally, starting at the crown of your head, cascading down, wrapping around you completely. A boundary. And boundaries matter when you begin exploring inner space. Because inner space isn't always tidy. Your own mind holds memories, fears, old thought forms, and all kinds of residual emotional weather that can distort perception when attention starts moving in unfamiliar ways. There's one more element the process considers essential: aligning bodily resonance with the Earth's electromagnetic field, around 7 to 7.5 hertz, what some call the Schumann resonance. Whether you take that literally or symbolically, the image is powerful. Your nervous system remembering it belongs to a larger rhythm, like a child falling asleep to the sound of a parent breathing. You don't force the calm, you sink into it. And when coherence builds, when mind and body stop pulling in opposite directions, something opens, a different kind of awareness. Not frantic and mental, but wide and quiet. This is where language begins to struggle, not because what happens is impossible to describe, but because it happens outside the space where language was invented. Gateway doesn't throw you into the deep end at once. It walks you down a staircase, step by step. Focus 10 is the first major threshold, and it's described in a phrase that anyone who has ever hovered at the edge of sleep will recognize instantly. Mind awake, body asleep. The body is heavy, breathing slow, but the mind remains completely clear, watching. Like sitting in a parked car with the engine off, fully aware of the world outside, but without the tension of needing to drive. From Focus 10, the process moves to Focus 12, expanded awareness. And this is where people start reporting something subtle but profound. The boundary of the self softens, not in a frightening way, more like the walls of a small room sliding outward, becoming a wide open field. inner imagery becomes sharper. Intuition becomes louder. Insights arrive in these strange, complete downloads that don't feel like thinking. They feel like remembering. Then focus 15 and focus 21. And this is where the language gets bold, because the experiences get bold. Focus 15 is associated with moving through time. Not as memory, not as imagination, but like tuning into another channel. Focus 21 goes further, beyond time-space, where reports include glimpses of future possibilities, not fortune-telling. More like sensing the shape of a river ahead by feeling the current beneath your feet. To understand why anyone would consider this scientifically, the gateway material starts pointing toward quantum physics concepts. The idea that energy can step outside time-space during the tiny rest moments between cycles. Imagine a film made of frames. Between each frame, there is a gap, an interval your eyes don't perceive. Now imagine reality has something like that too. Small moments where the normal rules loosen. A consciousness, sufficiently synchronized and coherent, could learn to navigate those gaps, the way a surfer rides a wave. And quantum entanglement. Two particles interact, separate by enormous distances, and still respond to each other instantly. No delay, no travel time, almost as if they aren't two in the way we assume. Some thinkers speculated that this communication happens during those gap moments, outside the normal cage of time-space. If something can operate outside time-space, instant connection stops being fantasy and becomes a property of a deeper layer of reality. Now bring it back to you. Because this isn't a physics lecture. It's about what you've probably already felt in your own life. Moments when you knew something before you could explain it. Moments when time slowed during an accident or accelerated during deep joy. Moments when a dream felt more real than waking life for just a second. And you dismissed it because you didn't have a category for it. Gateway says those aren't glitches, they're hints. And with training, hints become doorways. Something needs to be said clearly. Before we close, power without ethics turns rotten fast. Gateway's tools were not designed for coercion, manipulation, or control. And using consciousness work to invade someone else's boundaries, bypass psychological safety, or exert influence that was never consented to. That isn't evolution. It's immaturity with a sophisticated vocabulary. Respect the terrain. Respect your mind. Respect other people's boundaries. Because the heart of this entire story isn't espionage, it's identity. You've been living inside a narrow definition of reality because that's what most people inherit. A pre-approved, pre-filtered, pre-managed version of what's possible to perceive, experience, and be. And Gateway, beneath all the military language and all the quantum physics and all the numbered focus levels, quietly suggests one thing only. You don't have to stay inside that definition. The real shock of this entire story isn't in the classified files. It isn't in the remote viewing experiments. It's in a conclusion far simpler and far more personal. Reality may be much less solid than it appears, and your consciousness may be far more powerful than you were trained to believe. A synchronized mind becomes coherent. A coherent mind begins resonating with deeper layers. And once deeper layers come into view, time and space stop behaving like prison walls. You are not just living in reality. You are participating in it. And that difference between passively inhabiting and actively participating is all the difference there is. If this video opened a door you didn't know was closed, then it did what it came to do. Share it with someone who is also ready to explore beyond what was inherited. Subscribe to the channel, because what was opened here continues, and every video is one more layer of what you have always been, being remembered.